Welcome to the Think Podcast.
One place you can get hold of what I say about aliens is, in fact, my Genesis commentary, which is called the Genesis Account. Go creation.com/account. You get that book. There's also creation.com/academy, which is a 12-part teaching series based on the Genesis account, but with a lot of different speakers from 4 different countries speaking there. And one of my talks actually does touch on the Nephilim, the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim. So that's in the Genesis Academy. So there is one place you can get it. And in my book, I explain why I think that they are the offspring of fallen angels and human women. Okay, that's my view. It's not a salvation issue. It's not if you disagree with me, it doesn't mean you're a non-Christian or you don't believe the authority of Scripture. I think people who have genuine high view of Scripture can disagree with me on this thing. I find it very hard to. I think people, when it comes to the age of the earth, the creation issue, the only way you get long ages is to have ideas outside of Scripture. You cannot get from Scripture alone. And you look at the church history of interpretation; they're all young earthers, just about. And old earth views came in only because old earth views came in with so-called science. But when it comes to people who believe the authority of the Bible and a sola scriptura people, they can come up with different views. I think we are short of information there, but I do think the information we have supports the angelic view.
Why are people so fascinated with the topic of the Nephilim?
Well, I guess they want to see if that's actually compatible with alien life, or just it's a very interesting passage about possible supernatural things going on in early human history.
Do you see the ancient myths from different cultures of the gods coming down and procreating with, usually it is with, human women? Do you see that as being a sort of vestige of what actually happened in history?
I think it could be. I think that view is called euhemerism, is that sort of view that you have myths are based on something which happened in reality but have got distorted. And it's interesting that you have the offspring of these sons of God and these human women are called the men of renown. So you actually got this hint that these other people that you hear about and these other myths are probably identified with these Nephilim before the flood.
Yeah. Now, one of the difficulties that I've always thought about is, how does the record get passed from the antediluvian age to the post-diluvian age, the world we're living in now? Noah, and his sons, I guess, would have had to carry those records with them, correct?
I think that's what happened. And in fact, you've got evidence that Moses was the editor of Genesis. Well, he was the author of the other 4 books of the Torah, but he was born long after Genesis. But I think there's cases that the evidence that he has been the editor of it, of much older documents. Sometimes you see his editorial comments explaining things to the Israelites who came out of Egypt. You say, well, this city is like Zoar in Egypt, I think it was. I mean, have to explain. Why would you have to explain what Hebron is like? Everyone in Israel knew what Hebron was like. It's a major city, but for the people coming out of Israel, he had to explain what Hebron was like. But then you have Genesis 10:19. It says, as you go towards Sodom and Gomorrah. Here's a clue there, because what if you saw a tourist guidebook that said, as you go towards the Twin Towers? What would you conclude about the date of that writing?
It was written in the 90s, yeah. Or prior.
Yeah, so it means it must have been written before Sodom and Gomorrah were totally destroyed. There were still landmarks. So you see, there's where Moses did not bother to edit the much older document he had access to. Okay,
so that's very interesting. Yeah, Moses was the editor of Genesis, but the author of the other books.
I believe so.
One of my favorite lines is when Moses says, and Moses was the most humble man in all the earth. And I think Moses wrote those words.
It's a figure of speech, or Iliism, where you write in third person. Julius Caesar did that a lot too. He would often write, Caesar did this. Caesar was taken by surprise. He wrote in the third person as well. So Moses doing it is not necessarily that unusual.
Yeah, that makes sense. When it comes to the Nephilim, then, what are the different theories about the Nephilim? I know where you land, but what are some of the other theories that are out there?
probably the most common one in the sort of conservative Christian circles is that the sons of God meant the descendants of Seth, the godly people who are from Seth, and the daughters of men referred to the ungodly descendants of the wicked Cain. And it was intermarriage between these groups is what this passage was talking about. And they come up with some rationalization which might seem plausible on the surface. I think they are mistaken, but I don't. It doesn't mean they didn't hold a high view of Scripture. I just think they're mistaken. That's the difference there.
Okay.
I mean, for instance, Adam and Eve had other sons and daughters, not just Cain and Seth. There are other lines of humanity coming from Adam and Eve, so they've overlooked those the other parts. Another thing is that not all the descendants of Seth were necessarily bad people, because you look at two of the names, they have the name El in the name of the people in Genesis 4, which implies that the parents gave them a name reflecting that they knew the true God.
This is in the line of Cain. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it means that the parents may have given them names showing they knew the true God and wanted to dedicate their child to the true God, Elohim. That's the name, El. So does it mean just because Cain was a bad guy doesn't mean all his descendants were bad people?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So this idea that you had all the evil on one side, one line, and we're only going to focus on these two lines. Then you've got all the good on the other side. Plus, I heard one speaker, Doug Wilson, recently said, you'd have to explain why is all the masculinity on one side and all the femininity on the other.
Well, that's the thing, because if you have intermarriage between these things, why isn't it the other way around? Why don't you have daughters of God and sons of Cain? That's a good point that he makes, and he's a young earth guy as well. The other thing is most of the people of Seth's line were not godly. I mean, most of them were wiped out. Only Noah and his family survived, so most of the Sethites were ungodly as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, right.
And how is it godly to marry an unbeliever?
That's true.
So,
yeah.
I mean, I think it leads to a few more problems than it solves.
That's a good point, because so where I've gone just to strengthen the case that I don't agree with, just so I can make sure that I could, refute it, is you do have in ancient Israel, in like pre-exilic Israel, and maybe actually in post-exilic Israel too, you do have men who were marrying Canaanite women. Mm-hmm. And so you could say, well, that's the sons of God, daughter, and it's sort of an analogous thing there. But the sons there are not called righteous or anything like that. I mean, they're clearly condemned. It's viewed as very sinful.
But then on the other point, if these people from ungodly nations like Moab, the son of who is formed by incest of Lot and his daughter, and if that's Ruth, she married into the Israelite because she accepted the true Israelite God. So even if you have a bad ancestor, if you accept the true God, God will accept you. Okay. And God accepted Ruth. I mean, Ruth is in the Messianic line. She's the ancestor of David, and therefore the ancestor of Jesus himself. And then you have Rahab the Canaanite, who was rewarded for hiding the Israelite spies. She's also in the Messianic line. Mm-hmm. So she was accepted as part of the Israelite commonwealth. She married an Israelite and became an ancestor of David and Jesus.
Yes, and the Syrophoenician woman, even in the New Testament, who Jesus said, I haven't even seen faith like this in Israel. Talking about, she's a Canaanite woman. So, yeah.
And the centurion as well, who just said, well, Jesus can do it. Don't bother disturbing him, because he can do it by a word of his power. And right. There's no Jew who had the faith of this Israelite, of this Roman centurion, right?
Yes. Okay, so that's good. Well, I'm convinced. I know not everyone's going to be convinced, but I think a lot of our listeners are still working through these.
Okay, the main argument you get is because Jesus said angels don't marry. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
But if you go carefully, he said he was talking about what would happen to people in heaven. People in heaven will be like angels in heaven and don't marry. But people on earth marry. So maybe these fallen angels also married. They were not supposed to. In fact, when you look at 2 Peter and Jude, it's very clear they were punished by being thrown into Tartarus, in chains in Tartarus, because of this evil deed they did. Yeah. And you look at what they say, it was like the sin of the Sodomites going after strange flesh. So what do he mean? If it doesn't mean Genesis 6, where these angels were going after human flesh, which they were not supposed to do, I don't know what it's supposed to mean. There's no reference to these New Testament passage if you throw out Genesis 6.
Yeah.
They dangle sort of rootlessly. What are you talking about? Unless he's talking about what the angels did to the human women, the strange flesh.
Yeah. And if anything, you could view that with the way Jesus phrases it. He doesn't say they're like angels. They're like the angels in heaven, specifically the ones who did not leave, as Peter I think puts it. They did not leave their place of habitation. So Jesus is. You could even view it as he's actually specifically referring to the angels in heaven, because he understands his audience knows, but there are some angels who are not in heaven. I'm not talking about those. We all know what happened to those.
Yes.
Those ones left their place of habitation. They went down. They had children with the daughters of men, and they are now in Tartarus, as you mentioned earlier.
But there are some godly angels, like there's some godly angels who ate food with Abraham. So it means when you look at the angels, when they appear in the Bible, they always appear like men, never like women. They're always men. But then you got these three men who came to Abraham and they ate with him. So clearly when they do that, they have the ability to digest food. So maybe these ungodly ones have the ability to procreate too. I mean, that's the sort of thing. We don't really know much about them, except that they can take on human form. Most of the time they're doing it for God, as a messenger of God, but these angels were doing it as messengers of Satan, trying to corrupt the seed of the woman. That's what they were doing, and they were punished for it.